All right, hello and welcome to the Regenerative Mindset with your hosts, Seekins. That's me.
And Miles Adams, that's me.
Awesome. So we really wanted to create this podcast to kind of share the hype and the energy that we have about regenerative agriculture, regenerative practices that restore the land, restore communities, restore people's health. Um, so kind of the general format of this podcast is we'll be watching a couple great YouTube videos every week, a couple great pieces of media, and we'll talk about them and kind of share our energy and what they make us think of and why they're inspiring to us. So to kind of kick this off, Miles, like, how'd you get into this? How'd you get into like learning about regenerative agriculture?
Regenerative agriculture was really introduced to me just through like Netflix documentaries and kind of movies and stuff. Little Big Farm was a pretty big one for me. Um, and on top of that, just with Montessori school and everything, we have a lot of experience with gardening and trying to like think about how to live more sustainably. So once I saw these regenerative farming videos, something clicked, and that was really interesting for me. Yeah.
Yes,
So, but it was mainly just um, my own experience gardening, and then like movies that actually gave it a name, regenerative farming, and kind of showed me the potential of the whole thing. You know.
totally, totally. I feel pretty similarly. Like, also coming up in Montessori school, uh, doing a lot of gardening. I always thought it was cool, but I didn't really put it together in the whole system. And then I'd say the start of my journey was really when you recommended the biggest little farm to me, and I was like, damn, we can do it right. That's incredible. And yeah, I was really inspired by that, and then just a bunch of learning from books and pieces of media people have put out. Um, Next question: why do you think this is important?
I think this is important for many reasons. Probably the biggest one being the climate crisis we currently face.
Huge.
We've learned that regenerative farming has the ability to sequester large amounts of carbon from the atmosphere and put them into the soil naturally without any technology or anything that we thought we might need in order to do this. But also, it just kind of makes sense logically to me, kind of working with nature and trying to establish that natural balance of the ecosystem. Um, I don't know. It just it clicked in my mind and it made total sense rather than fighting.
Yeah. Would you say that's a major tenet of like regenerative practices? Is like kind of going with how nature would do things?
100%. I think that's almost the point of it is trying to establish this natural balance in the ecosystem where you can kind of sit back and watch things happen. But I think our role as humans is to just kind of guide it in the right direction, and eventually it'll happen.
I know a lot of people when they think about global warming and they think about kind of changing our farming practices, they feel like that's going to be full of compromises. We're going to have to move back, use less, eat less. Do you feel like regenerative farming is a compromise solution?
I don't think so. I think maybe maybe you won't be able to produce on the same just giant scale that a lot of single monoculture like farms do, but I think rather than that being a setback, I think it's helping restore small farms and like almost a community aspect of farming, which has been gone for a while, where you're just trying to feed a small group, your general community, rather than like sell a mass amount of plants to grocery stores.
Totally. I absolutely see it that way too. It'll help us kind of get back to a way that it could be done that's a lot healthier for everybody around, like building the communities, and in that way, kids and people of the community can know more directly where their food comes from. And
And a deeper connection with it as well.
yeah, I feel like another big theme through all this is like the cyclical nature of consumption versus the linear nature of consumption.
Hmm.
So that would be like the linear nature of like a linear consumption path would be like um, you mine oil out of the earth, you produce it into plastic, somebody drinks water out of it, that plastic goes into the trash. So it's like goes through a line.
Yeah,
But a cyclical version would be
you're
like
putting everything back into the earth that you take out of it almost.
right, and even in a way
Yeah,
that it can like almost get healthier every year, almost bring more in. Like nature's
yeah,
full of those circular cycles. Like a tree that grows and then dies, falls to the earth, and like enriches the soil for more trees to grow healthily. Um,
yeah. And I feel like the cyclical cycle is just kind of the idea of like sustainability. You're able to do this every year without draining natural resources. Instead, you're actually putting more natural resources into the earth. So I think in order to be a long term, like functioning society, we need to be cyclical rather than linear, because linear obviously at some point comes to an end.
yeah, yeah. Um, awesome. Well, you want to get into this week's video?
All right, yeah.
Okay, so
Um,
yeah, you introduce.
you got it.
Okay. Um,
Yeah.
so this week's video, linked in the description of the podcast, is India's Permaculture Revolution #2 by Andrew Millison. Andrew Millison's a permaculture instructor. He went to India to document the actions of this foundation called the Pawnee Foundation, and they've hosted a water cup between a bunch of rural Indian villages, all encouraging them and giving them funding and knowledge to build water harvesting earthworks. And that's a huge part of these regenerative practices are these water harvesting earthworks. And they have like the magical effects of returning water to the land, collecting a lot of water, and so that springs run all year.
Um, yeah, so basically in these small villages, um, they get about 3 months of rainfall, and in Velu it's like 8 to 12 inches in this 3 month period, and then they might not get any rain for the rest of the year entirely. So the big problem they were facing is they get enough water to sustain their village, but it's all in one period. So the majority of that water is lost through runoff and floods and stuff. So the whole idea behind the water cup was to find ways to naturally retain that water and be able to use it for the other 9 months of the year where it often gets really dry.
Yes, absolutely. So that's when the water comes down in the rainfall. It doesn't get a chance to soak up into the land, and it just runs right off. And so that water is just being wasted, just being returned right to the ocean. But
Hmm.
through these earthworks, these people devised a way to return it to the spring water, to the wells underneath the city, underneath the
Yeah.
village, which helps crops and plants grow. So, what are the benefits? Can you tell us some more about the benefits of having that water in the watersheds?
Oh yeah. Well, you mentioned the bore wells and like drilling into the water table, and that was really the only source of water in these 9 months where they don't get rain. And so since everyone is using that water, it gets depleted really quickly. And with all this water running off, it doesn't really get restored. So by slowing down the water and making it percolate into the soil, it then returns to the water table where you have access to it for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and before we get into why that's so awesome to have all that water there, let's talk about what these earthworks actually are.
Okay. Yeah, no, they use um, contour trenches basically on the hills and mountains around them, so that when the water falls, it doesn't just go straight down the mountain. They're horizontally dug trenches that just the idea is to slow down the water. Um,
And
You
what do you
want
mean by like on contour?
to, they're just trenches dug horizontally or perpendicular with the water flow so that the water can't just go straight down the mountain. Is that what you were looking
Yeah,
for?
yeah, totally,
Yeah.
totally. And so like if they're coming down the mountain, instead of just like continuing down the face of the mountain, there's like a dip so that it falls into here, and then because this is on contour, there's no like height change in this. It stays flat right here and gives an opportunity to soak in instead of flowing in any particular direction.
Yeah, and it just kind of pools up the water um, down the mountain, and it doesn't all just leave a little bit. At least gets to percolate. The water does overflow these trenches, obviously, but it still does a pretty good job of slowing them down. Um,
Totally.
another tool they used were these percolation like ponds. So once you get off of the super hilly regions, you have these kind of big, almost reservoirs that the water drains into, and that's kind of the start or the head of the rivers that lead down to other villages. So rather than just letting the water go to these tanks, overflow, and then go down into the river, they actually built up their ponds to store more water. And in the video, they had a major percolation pond, but it's accidentally built on bedrock. So the water is just kind of stagnant and it's not able to really percolate into the water table. Um, and this one, it would stay full all year, but when the monsoons would come, it would overflow and lose almost all of the monsoon rain into the river. So what they did is they built up the spillway with dirt, and they just raised the level. Um, and then on the far side, they built a gate that ran into a underwater pipe, which used gravity to um, bring water to other ponds that were much closer to the village and had a much smaller watershed, but actually could truly percolate into the water table.
So cool. And so for those percolation ponds, that's the water being able to sit on porous dirt so that the water can soak into the water table. There's no plastic sheets or anything involved to protect those ponds.
No, yeah, it's all about drainage, draining into the ground. Yeah.
Okay, so now that we have a water table that gets filled up that collects all these monsoon rains instead of the monsoon rains just flowing off into the ocean, what kind of benefits do like the people in the land see for for that water collection?
Um, I mean, other than restoring a very depleted water table, and just because at some point in the dry season, these wells would run out fully, and they would have to bus in water, which is very expensive and um, definitely not sustainable. Um,
Yeah, and that's like money leaving the community too.
yeah,
And
exactly.
they also
Um,
told stories of like villagers who, when they run out of water, they can't grow crops at their in their village anymore, so they become migrant laborers, which is
mhm.
a tough existence, and you like move away from your community.
Yeah, and these farmers would move to the big cities and work for the dry season, and then come back with the monsoons. And even though they weren't making much as migrant laborers, they still make more than they would not being able to grow anything. Um, so this water table just kind of makes year round growing a lot easier, um, and the fields can sustain crops year round. I forgot what crops they grew, but actually many villagers who had like permanently left the village, they talked about them also coming back and helping with the whole the whole contest as well as just being able to farm afterwards, you know.
Yes, I feel like this is such a huge point. Restoring the
I
land
I can't hear
to
you.
I feel like this is such a huge point. Restoring the land to be so able to be used by all these people, to
Mhm.
produce food off and as a place to like build community.
Yeah.
What about some of like the non-human effects, like wildlife and
Oh, they did talk a little bit about birds, and I think he said it just focused for a minute on just the sound of the birds and all that, and that was really nice. Um,
and those
but it
birds
didn't.
like weren't there before, weren't there
No, yeah,
before.
they came back with the water, just almost like some of the villagers in the community. Um, and another interesting thing, just community wise, is it's so amazing how it the entire project took like teamwork of the entire community, and everyone had to work together. But it also benefits everyone, not just a few people. The whole community is much more lively, and it's thriving now. In the video, you can see
Totally.
people.
It
Yeah,
reminds me of like I feel like sometimes we get tripped up thinking that we can do everything alone and take care of ourselves alone, but we really like we share so much of our existence like in our place that's so obvious and in our world that's so obvious. So like um, it just points out how connected we are in that and kind of back zooming out of this exact video but talking about regenerative practices again. This inspires me so much not to like it gives me material so that I can say I'm not just gonna sit back and watch our world burn, watch our wells dry up, you know. That I'm gonna learn about and apply and inspire people to apply these practices that actually make the land healthier every year, so that we don't have to sit
yeah.
back and watch it degrade.
And this is one small village increasing the quality of life, not just for themselves, but for many villages downstream of them also. Um, it
Because
talks
they're
about
healing
how,
the water table that goes all the way down.
yeah, yeah, it's the water tables are, Edwards aquifer in Austin is pretty massive. Um, it's similar, the similar concepts, if
Totally.
not the same.
So
Yeah.
this doesn't hurt. Does this steal from anyone else?
No, because the water would go into to streams that would go into rivers that would just go into the ocean.
Yeah.
Um,
And even those
and
rivers would flood and possibly damage people's houses and croplands
yeah,
and things like that.
yeah, no, there's big monsoon floods, especially on the larger rivers.
So isn't it incredible that um, through like paying attention to the earth and learning about how water tables work and building earthworks that contribute to those water tables, um, we can steal from no one, heal a community and the communities down the line, and not just the people, not just their financial health, but their community health and their physical health, and
Mhm.
not just the people, but also all the wildlife and the land.
And yeah, it affects the entire ecosystem. You don't think about yourself being given that rainfall
Hmm.
because it almost disappears after the flood. You think about the flood being a
D-
natural
disaster even.
yeah, it's just kind of it happens with the monsoons, but also you can naturally kind of stem this or like reduce this, and you have so much to gain from that almost.
Totally.
Um, it's I don't know. We think about a lot of things in nature as like kind of us versus nature. We have to withstand that, or we have to like just live through it. But if you look on the bright side and say, how can I gain from this? There's actually a lot to be gained, you know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to our first episode of the Regenerative Mindset. Any closing
Yeah.
thoughts, Miles? Yeah.
It's a little rough right now, but we'll get it down. We're learning too, you know, along with everyone listening, and we kind of just want to give an ear to that process. We obviously don't know everything or even a lot about regenerative farming. Um, but I think that's kind of the point of this is we're just normal people and we want to make it more accessible to normal people, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally, totally. Thank you
Yeah.
for that. I feel the same.